volunteering that's split into 3 parts: custody visitors, specials and volunteers.
Custody visiting will be covered by PCC's paper.
Right,
yeah, don't worry.
You
just having a go for there.
Yeah. So just to quickly comment on the custody visiting, and we've got Elaine here, who is the person that manages and administers the independent custody visitors scheme on behalf of this office. I think some of the headlines around that are that we have seen quite a significant reduction in the number of visits that have been undertaken. But of course, one of the big reasons behind that is that the number of custody suites has dropped from 7 in 2013 to 5 by 2015. There has been also a drop in the number of independent custody visitors as well. But I know there's been a campaign to recruit and bolster the numbers recently.
One planned for March of next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think overall, although I don't think it is in the report, there has been quite a significant increase in the number of detainees actually going through.
Decrease.
Yeah.
Decrease.
Going through our custody areas, which clearly has an impact on the visits and the availability of detainees, as it were. But is anything else you want to add, Elaine? Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I mean, the throughput is clearly relevant because there has been, I believe, over the last 5 years, about a 46% reduction in throughput. So that's had an impact. It does look quite stark, but there's been a reduction that there has been in the report. But the throughput is clearly relevant. So in actual fact, if you do balance it across, compare across, you could perceive it that there's been more visits to detainees. The scheme's running well. We undoubtedly need to do another recruitment campaign, and that is planned for March of next year. We have a good relationship with Force Custody, and we keep in regular contact with officers in there, and we provide regular updates with relevant information via newsletters and seminars that we hold with our existing ICBs.
No, thanks for that, Elaine, and you know, it is appreciated that your role and obviously the work of the volunteers in providing this scheme, because despite the sort of decreases in the number of detainees, which is a good thing, it is an important role to make sure that we have independent scrutiny and oversight in the way in which detainees are treated within our custody areas. So thanks very much for that, and again to put on record our thanks to the volunteers who carry out the visits. Is there any comments?
I'd just like to ask a question if I could. In the information that is being gathered, I wonder whether there would be any merit in getting the views of the visitors around the complexities. And what I mean by that is the timeliness of getting hold of appropriate adults, for example, or solicitors, language issues and so on, if they would be prepared to sort of make some observations about that, because we might have our own views in force, but actually getting that independent consideration might be quite useful for us to be able to go back to other agencies with as well.
They'd be very keen to capture that for you, and certainly we've used that kind of approach before with similar things, and they're more than happy to come forward with that kind of information. In some respects it is captured, because occasionally if there are delays around certain areas, then they do capture that and it's recorded. But we can certainly proactively ask them to do that.
I suppose the other thing, Commissioner, that's been happening during that same period really is the work from the IPCC, HMIC, College of Police and Improved Professional Practice, the Care and Welfare and Detention Doctrines, the work of our own custody policy units, legal services debrief and professional standards, plus the custody visitors have all contributed to a far greater care and welfare and detention of individuals, less critical incidents, less attempts at self-harm, and overall less complaints in that nature. So we do welcome the independence of the visitors, but it goes alongside a whole host of other actions that you know we're undertaking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's important to recognise that. with regards to the work of the staff within the custody areas. You know, and it is a difficult environment, so there's no doubt about that. Having visited a number of custody areas over the years myself, but thanks for that update and report, and we will continue to monitor the work of the independent custody visitors going forward. Mark, do you want to...
if I can pick up that, Commissioner, with the specials and the volunteering aspect. I'll try and keep my comments fairly brief. This is the first time I've presented back on this area, although it's obviously been ongoing for some time. That's because I've taken responsibility for it. It just might be worth touching initially on the new arrangements and structures. So initially, the project around specials and volunteers was placed under a programme of change and sat in the Force Performance Improvement Unit. It was a good place to put it to sort of start it off, but as a result of discussions we sort of had internally with colleagues, there was a wish to try and mainstream it a little bit more and place it within a sort of an operational business area. So I sort of offered, it's still a project, but I offered to take it under the OPS area, Protective Service Operations, and that's moved underneath then. We've actually put it within a current force planning unit. So last year we created the force planning unit, bringing all together the planning side, and we actually felt that when you look at some of the things we do around specials and volunteers, which is around obviously recruitment, training and deployment and organisation, that the right sort of skill match was there. The other reason for doing it was, as a project under programme of change, it was led with a sort of an exclusive chief inspector role, and we were able to entirely save the costs of that. The role has disappeared, and the supervision at that level has been taken on by the inspector and chief inspector for planning in the force planning unit. So we've been able to make a saving there, which means that the small team, it is a very small team at this very moment, we have a sergeant in there who was funded through to May 2016. We have a PC's post in there, although that individual retired just before Christmas, so we're looking to replace them. And we have a part-time support from a member of police support staff, which now sits within the force planning unit. And although that's quite a small team of people, the idea of putting in the force planning unit is when they need to undertake activities at a greater level, they can actually lean upon colleagues there who can assist. So just to give you an update as to how we're currently structuring to take it forward. The report you've got in front of you, I've sort of followed suit from predecessors in as much as this is the format in which it sort of is prepared. I'll certainly be willing to take any views from yourself afterwards. Some of the figures in there are instructive. Others may be, I'm not quite so sure how valuable they are. It's a little bit of a performance-y report, and I think I would like to in the future, but subject to your comments, report back a little bit more qualitatively in respect to some of the work we're doing. And the issue probably of targets might be one to come back to. 5 pages into the specials one, if I could just identify the 1500 target, and when I sort of cover one or two of the items I'm going to cover, I think it's fair to say that the 1500 target, the fact that it's such a round number and such a large number, was clearly about being aspirational and making a game change. My feel for it, as I've picked it up and started to get a feel for this area, it's really not about hitting a target. It's about using people effectively to support policing services, and I'll come back to that. So if I just start on page one, just very quickly. So on the workforce side of it, the sort of headline figures really, presently we're around about the 950 mark, having started really down to about 400, and we currently have more special constables working for us than we've ever had before, as far as we can know. I think the table you have in the middle there, just the way I think it's plateaued around that 950, and I think it's starting to tell us maybe that 1,000 special mark, I think, is not going to be far from what we may be needing to sustain going forward. Now I say that because when I took the portfolio over, everything really was about focusing on that 1,500 recruitment, training it, a little bit of a sausage factory, if I can use that term. And one of the tasks I've been setting people is to say, well, no, we've got 5 district policing entities. We've got a protective services area, and although crime is part of that, because these are uniform, generally speaking, special constables, particularly ops areas, so we've got 6 business areas. Each of those business areas should have a business deployment plan for special constables, how many they may wish to deploy in neighbourhood policing, response, what they might need to commit to, say, nighttime economies, that sort of side of it. And so I've been driving to try and get a plan of that nature, driven from the bottom up, and that to me will determine what number then we should be working towards and sustaining. Work so far, and it's in progress, is if I added all the plans up that I've got so far, I've got all the plans, but they're just not fully developed in my view. I've actually got a number requirement below the 949 officers that we've already got working. So I don't say that we've got too many. I say we needed to be evolving those plans forward. So I'm hoping at future meetings to report more back on what do those look like in practice. And I hope by doing that, that sort of say good work in one area is more likely to be shared or replicated in others as we find good uses for them. And one area which we are moving for, just to give you an example of what I mean by that, is we have we've for a number of years within the ops area had special constables deployed as public order serials, which some people find quite strange really, because it's seen as quite a high level of policing, but actually the training gap is quite an easy one to bridge, and we've used them very effectively in football, English Defence League, and all manner of demonstrations. We've just agreed with the districts that they feel that we could create public order capability for their nighttime economies, and so work is going on there. So that to me is putting the meat on the bone of what does the business plan look like. So just a sort of a comment there in respect of that. I think that's the main area I want to sort of talk about in terms of where I'm trying to take it. Just I've touched on targets, haven't I? Yeah, no, I won't comment further in the detailed report on some of the statistics into the breakdown, other than to say you'll see that we're clearly recruiting at the younger end of the population, and still are with a number of people coming through and training. I think that's to be expected because we have been recruiting from special constables, and so therefore we are attracting people who I think, not all of them, but many of them are hopeful when they are joining the regular ranks. We're seeing better than force positions sort of recruitment around female officers, and significantly better around BME groups. So things I think you would anticipate anyway, but again, put us in a position, I think, given the news you just announced about recruitment, again, hopefully springboard a little bit into that. If I just quickly move to volunteers, and I will admit that it's
actually, can I'll stop with them, as I'd like to just explore some questions on specials first before we move to the actual volunteers section. Just looking in detail at some of the statistics provided in here, and we will talk to you about the format and the presentation of this, but it is quite a detailed report, and I think it is really useful. So the first point I'd like to make is around specials in Calderdale, which appear to be quite a bit lower than the other districts. But added to that, it does appear that the specials in Calderdale have the largest proportion of working 16 hours or more. And so the question is that a case of those people being more engaged, or are they actually better tasked and utilised perhaps than what they are in the other districts?
I can see why the question is asked. I don't think that's actually the case. I mean, in part, Calderdale have fewer because they are considerably smaller. There have been more issues of recruiting people into Calderdale, and that's partly because, and it comes down to the second point that you were raising, Leeds, for example, particularly the city centre of Leeds, and the nature of policing there is quite attractive to prospective special constables, and so there are just more people who want to work in the more central zones of the force. Whereas at Calderdale, we're really recruiting very much more local Calderdale people wanting to work locally in Calderdale. The level of commitment, I wouldn't make that qualitative judgment, although given what I've just said, you could understand maybe why they are engaged around those sorts of things, but I don't think there's enough evidence or information to make that sort of intuitive leap.
Yeah, I think just following on from that at Calderdale, Calderdale have gone through quite an extensive programme of cleansing in relation to officers that maybe were on the books but haven't turned up for work. So Alex Langley, who I know you've met a few times when you've been over at Calderdale, he and Georgina have spent a lot of time having frank conversations with some of the special constables that are not turning up for duty and actually then choosing to leave Calderdale. So whilst we only have a core few, the ones that are there absolutely make a difference. So it's more probably around cleansing of numbers and tidying up the books, so to speak, at Calderdale.
Yeah, I mean they've got nearly 80 in Calderdale, so it's it's a decent number, but there's a pro rata proportion to the other districts. It is relatively lower. So I just make that point. I think we've explored it.
One of the things we've looked at with the central team is, in theory, we could deploy them to any district and equalise numbers if you. Yeah. But in practice, people tend to apply wanting to do certain roles in policing, and also that does include districts as well. So as I say, the lead effect of the fact that we do a lot of work around city centre work there is a big draw. So I think it's one of those things where I don't think we'll ever get an absolute equal like for like across the districts, and I think the differences are explainable in that sort of way about the locality of the policing.
Just following on from that then, it's connected into something that you've said, page 3, where it looks at the increases in specials on response duties. That's gone up from 16.5% to 26%, well nearly 27%, but a decrease from what we would deem neighbourhood policing activity from just short of 35% down to about 27%. I'm just trying to understand that dynamic.
Now, what I'm about to say, I probably, if you wanted me to verify what I'm about to say, I'd probably have to do quite a bit more research to do it. But the model of policing has been changing, as you know, in terms of moving sort of dedicated neighbourhood policing into a more, moving some of that neighbourhood function into response policing, and the way in which we therefore count numbers as well, I think, in that sort of changing environment is probably what sort of explains those sorts of figures in broad terms. Now I can look at it further for you if you wish me to do, but I think that in simple terms is what you see in there is that the organisation is changing, and whereas in the past I think it'd be I would say that we would tend to, if people were sort of a foot in both camp, we'd count them in neighbourhoods. It's probably flipping a bit more the other way as neighbourhood policing is being developed underneath response policing and the new models.
When Peter Fahey was the Chief Constable lead for Special Constables, there was an understanding nationally that all Special Constables would specialise in being neighbourhood policing Special Constables. When we decided that we wanted to move forward and increase the numbers and encourage people to want to come and work with West Yorkshire Police, which also coincided with a change of policy nationally away from having purely dedicated neighbourhood special constables and allowed you to either post to response or indeed some other specialisms. I think whilst the percentage has changed, the numbers of people still dedicated to neighbourhood policing has actually increased overall, because we've increased the numbers overall. Right. So I am less concerned about that percentage actually, and many of those people who are now joining the specials, as we know, have got aspirations to join the service full time, and we also need to give them an opportunity to fully complete their independent patrol status, which is easier to do if you are on response than it is if you're in neighbourhoods.
Yeah, I accept that there are a number of different factors at play here with this. I guess, and I take the point earlier about, yes, the 1500 was always an aspirational target, if you like, in order to increase the activity of getting specials in and trained. Nevertheless, I think there was an intent to try and put more specials into sort of neighbourhood type roles, given the pressure on neighbourhood policing because of the budget situation.
I think that's absolutely right. That's one of the reasons why I'm pushing districts in particular on that area to develop their local business plans, because we can then actually sort of hang a figure and target and push towards capability in neighbourhoods more meaningfully. Whereas at the moment, it's probably a little bit more like we've recruited a lot, trained a lot, and we've still a number in the course of doing it, and it's just choosing where we're actually sort of hanging them at the moment a little bit. And I think if we just got the clarity of a business plan, I mean, I think, for example, in Leeds, what's probably constraining Leeds at the moment now is without that clarity of deployment business plan, their specials liaison officers are extremely busy just organising 400 specials across Leeds. One PC in particular carries a lot of that sort of work. I think if we get that business plan clear, then what you will be saying is, well, that neighbourhood inspector or response inspector will expect and to receive 10 special constables, and we would then expect them to have a greater part in organising their deployments and take that off what currently is still centrally organised, whether it be at force level or in district level. So I think it's how we evolve the model going forward, which is why I made the comments at the beginning. I think we've got to get more into some of this qualitative stuff, because to go from 400 to 950, I can tell you now that the administrative infrastructure to support it has not changed since that start. So I think we're just starting to realise that and trying to work through those issues.
Right, well, one of the follow-on questions, and I think Dee has touched on this already, so in Kirklees, for example, we've got more than 80% of specials with independent patrol status. And a question around that is, what checks do we do around that, around the quality of the policing of those with that status? And can anything be learned, therefore, from Kirklees regarding the high level of independent patrol status, as opposed to Leeds and Wakefield, who've got 56 and 49% respectively around independent patrol status?
Well, first of all, you picked up on what is, I have to put my hand up and say, an error, we believe, in the reporting, that our figures for Kirklees aren't added in the risk report. It's actually nearer the sort of mean. We reckon it's actually 41%. Oh. But the point you make, I think, is still a valid one to sort of respond to. I have been, on the board that I run, I've been querying the independent patrol status. It's a little bit of a carryover from that which exists in the training of regular officers. We recruit them as student officers, and at a certain point during the student officer probationary period, we say that they're sufficiently skilled for independent patrol. It's almost like, I think, it's a tick to say we've trained them and developed them to the level that we would wish to. That's, I think, what it means. It tends to, because of the way it's called independent patrol, tends to sort of signify in some people's minds that at that point they are then independent. And again, back to come back to this business plan, but what I'm trying to do is both allow a degree of autonomy for special constables, because I think the example that we won in the Ferrers Award, the work around obviously paramedic work, allowing people who bring skills in to use those skills almost independently of policing is good. But I think that 80% probably in broad terms is more about how they integrate and are part of policing teams. So I sort of, the independent patrol is more a measure about how quickly we're managing to get people through training and through the development sort of programme, which is more about them being able to get through quite a large number of days and inputs down at the training school and local coordinators, and you'll see there's varying degrees of levels of those in terms of actually getting them developed locally. So I wouldn't get hung up on independent patrol in the sense of is it about one not being more skilled than the other. I think it's more about how many people we've just reached the bar which we would want for special constables. We don't really want special constables to join and take all of 10 years, all of 2 years to be up. We want to bring that time down, but we are, with the numbers, finding it quite a challenge.
It's very much, you know, there's national guidance around the status. This is exactly the same reflection from becoming an independent full-time police officer, where you no longer have to be tutored, because not only have you had all of this, the adequate training, but you have demonstrated those core competencies, so that as a supervisor you're more than happy for somebody to go out and patrol without being supervised. And obviously that's going to vary depending on where you are working, how quickly you can get that experience. It's easy to get that experience very rapidly if you're doing city centre patrols, for example. And that's why you see the rates vary. And of course it also depends on people's availability to come in and do duties as well.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. But we will need to make sure the report is correct then in terms of those figures, because clearly I was assuming double the rate in Kirklees than what is actually the case. So, okay, we'll pick that up. I think just finally then on specials, given the big increase in the numbers as we've discussed, has there been any impact around complaints against specials, for example?
There has. I've had a recent meeting with the head of professional standards. Obviously specials don't work as many hours as regular officers, but they are forming quite a significant percentage of our workforce in numbers. And I think there's a proportionate increase related to that. And we feel the discussion we had really was maybe a lot of it was about reinforcement of very basic standards. So I mean, some of the matters which are coming to light are not particularly serious. I would describe them as good discipline type of issues. So it is an area. The one area which is a little bit strange at the moment working through is that from our HR policy point of view, they are, and it's just correct, they are treated in a sense as an employee. So if we have a special constable who we no longer really wish them to work for the force as a special constable. So let's just choose someone who's not done anything particularly wrong, just is the wrong sort of individual with the wrong sort of values and that sort of thing. We have to take through UPP and various things. Now there's quite an old piece of legislation I'm having researched at the moment, which I think would allow us to dispense with their services. You effectively retire them is the legal side of it. And it's saying this because I'm on the record here. This is not because I have a great desire or the force has a great wish to suddenly dispense with the services of lots of specials, but I think there are a number of people at the moment who are creating quite a bit of supervisory work for the specials liaison officers and local supervision, for whom a more early conversation and departing from the organisation would be a better way of dealing with it really. So most of the issues around the specials are fairly basic, I would say, in terms of professional standards, but because of the numbers it's definitely been noticed now.
So just to be clear then, going back to the original comment around the recruitment of specials, are we now saying that the 1,500 is not something we are aspiring to, or will we be continuing with some recruitment of specials as well?
We are continuing the recruitment programme. It's detailed here. We still got an active recruitment and training programme going on. We are reviewing that literally in the last couple of months because of the change around the budget settlement and the fact that the people we use for training specials would be the same we would use for regular officers. But I would hope at future meetings what I should be bringing to you is I mean, at the moment we're really just bringing you figures, aren't we, in that sort of large numbers. I would be hoping to bring you a more clear business case saying actually we should be recruiting either 1,000 or 1,200 or start to put a business figure there and say no, that's the figure we should be looking not just to work towards but to be maintaining the numbers and training appropriately to meet them. I think stopping where we are isn't the answer, but I think pressing on single-mindedly, and I think that's what we were doing for a while as a force. We were almost focusing as the success or otherwise of the specials project was a figure of 1,500, and I think that's what I'm suggesting to you. We should just have we should be evolving our thinking as we develop the business.
Yeah, I mean clearly part of that was in the context of the anticipated budget cuts.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now that is revised, then there is a case to revise the aspirations around specials, but you know, nevertheless, we've doubled
We have.
the number of specials, and they are a significant asset in terms of deployment and the amount of energy and effort that goes into training them. And of course they are volunteers and they're giving up their time, often many of them already with jobs, to come and, you know, give their time free. So we should be doing our best for them in equipping them and getting them ready for policing out in the community.
Agree. And I think the move of the specials team into the force planning unit I've had feedback from special constables themselves who said that has been a very helpful move. It's that they felt that it's grounded them more and brought them closer to the organisation. And we are doing one or two interesting things around. I always quote the figure that 25% of the operational deployment around the Grand Depart were special constables.
Yeah.
Similarly at the Tour of Yorkshire, we've got the Leeds Triathlon event in the World Triathlon Series in May, and we are very hopeful that we will not just most of the uniformed staff working on that will be special constables, but we're also hoping that a lot of the supervision of that will be special constables. And I think it's by doing real things and giving responsibility, I think, which we will continue to encourage the growth we've seen and also maintain that going forward.
Okay, thank you. We'll just move on to the volunteers section now, Matt. Thank you.
Well, I was going to say much less about the volunteers, to be fair. I mean, the volunteers work, we've got, I think, much less of a strategic focus around at this stage. It's, generally speaking, most of our volunteers, it's driven by very local departments and districts, contacts with people who just, there's a natural fit to something that they can come in and do. The reason I've not pushed too hard on it was, in some of the conversations we just had around the specials, I felt that if I could break the back of the specials business plan, I think the volunteering could start to fall into place a little bit earlier. Some of the figures and counting within it, just to be sort of borne in mind that when we've used people on large sporting events, which I've touched on earlier, as volunteers, we've counted them, and things like explorers programs and student guardians, where we've been working with these sort of people over like a year program. They sort of come on our books as volunteers and then leave, which is why the figure at the end of the report of 498 leavers isn't a mass exodus. There's a natural consequence of running programs of that nature where people are signing on and signing off. So I'm not content myself at this moment in time that we're getting the most out of volunteers. In fact, I know we could get more, but I'd like to have the playing field as to where we put them a little bit clearer as the sort of specials work sort of moves forward as well. So the figures that have been given on 1,000, I'd actually say where we put 1,000 volunteers at this moment in time, I really haven't got that answer, to be able to give to you at this moment. That is quite an ambitious number, I think, in terms of what we are largely a uniformed service. So the places to put volunteers, I don't think is as straightforward as it is for special constables.
Yeah, I mean that was I picked up from reading the report. I mean, clearly, again, a very ambitious target around having 1,000 volunteers in place in addition to the special constables, and from the trajectory we're some way off that, but that, I think you're right, that's not the be all and end all. It's about how we utilise, again, people who are prepared to give their free time to assist the police and our communities. And I guess one of the things, so we've got a figure there around the neighbourhood watch coordinators, who are, I accept, a slightly different category, but again do a really valuable job with regards to the neighbourhood watchers in each of our neighbourhoods and communities. And I think the figure that's given there around the coordinators, 3,340, that was the figure that we had back in June of last year. And I'm just wondering if we are confident that we are properly engaging with those, and if the numbers are in fact correct, and the level of support we are giving to Neighbourhood Watch, because you know, that's something that we did review last year and can often play a really valuable role within our communities.
The numbers are fairly stable in that area, but I think there is more we can do to answer your question in relation to that. I mean, that is one area where I think it is going to be worth putting strategic effort over the long term into. I mean, we have a, you know, within the force performance improvement, you know, although I've taken special volunteer, this is one area where actually it has and always really should sit within that area, and the individual who's responsible for that also has other responsibilities. So I think we could probably get more out of that. It would be helpful if you were to be saying to me, well, you'd like more effort into that area, that would be helpful, because I think it's easier to deliver to that specific, again, rather than, well, it's about recruiting more. Actually, if it's a focus on that, I think we can achieve more.
Well, I think it's a ready-made audience, and these people are very, you know, often very committed and want to contribute and assist the police.
Yeah.
So, for me, you know, through this office and working with the staff here, we've always been very supportive of Neighbourhood Watch, and you know, I would really welcome a renewed sort of effort around engagement there. Yeah.
Maybe if we're a separate meeting, if we bring you a position statement as to where we are, what we're doing with them at this moment in time, and have a discussion about how we can take that forward.
I think that would be very helpful, bearing in mind, you know, what does Neighbourhood Watch 2016 look and feel like, and an opportunity to perhaps recruit some younger members of the community to be part of that, because there's a very, very successful Neighbourhood Watch youth system in one or two parts of the country. And also, of course, on the back of Moor and Brewers Award as well, there's likely to be quite a bit of interest out in communities. So it just feels as if this is the right time to say, what does Neighbourhood Watch 2016 look like?
Absolutely, yeah. And just a question, so if a police volunteer applies for a police support staff post, or indeed a police officer post, are they classed as internal candidates?
No, because they're not an employee in that sense. We've gone through that and taken the legal advice and looked at it, but they're not an employee in that sense.
But I think it needs to be captured in some way, if they are applying as people that have contributed as a volunteer.
Well, part of the issue is the vetting levels are the same, and there are a number of other discrepancies. That's why we've sought legal advice as to whether or not they could count as an internal candidate for specific posts. It has generated some difficulty actually for us.
Yeah, it may come out in reference us, because I suppose if they put us as a referee, then it would come out through in that way.
Yeah.
It's just that, of course, with the specials, with the limited recruitment we've been able to do over the last 2 or 3 years, we have restricted it to special constables.
And PCSOs and police staff.
Yeah, which are classed as internal.
But they've been, you know, they're sworn warranted officers under the police regulations. They've had to have undertaken the independent patrol and a certain amount of hours.
The
issue with volunteers is
yeah.
somebody does 1 hour and then it's what quantifiable. I suppose just the additional point, Commissioner, to show in terms of the police and crime plan, and whilst we might not be meeting the volume which we'd initially set on, in terms of what we're actually doing with them. On that page it's about victim contact, code of practice. You know, there is some administrative stuff being worked with them about Explorer programs, witness surveys, community engagement, and then assisting in our training regime, as well as other things of stable hands. But it's predominantly now witness focus, witness support, and supporting officers rather than traditionally administrative tasks.
Yeah, I could argue brought you a paper which did hit the target, because all the volunteers we are using in the Tour of Yorkshire I've left offshored, as it were, with Welcome to Yorkshire. So the 1,400 people on their books, which we trained the 1,000 last year, as you know, I haven't counted those in, but they are part of the... So it's one of those things where we could play games of counting. I think the focus on things like the Neighbourhood Watch we just discussed, and maybe choosing 1 or 2 other key areas where volunteers... I do think there's an area probably around investigation, because crime have had some good results in that area. Some of the road safety work I think we could get volunteers for, and it would then be worth, if we did it in that more coherent way, it'd be worth investing the training in, because with most volunteers, you're tending to match someone with a set of skills to a particular job. Whereas with specials, recruitment, training, so it is a different thing really, but I think by concentrating on 2 areas, we will probably get better results.
Yeah, and I think finally, just on, so looking at the turnover, so 498 volunteers have resigned because of various things, but the biggest one being work commitments. And I'm just wondering if we've tried to do anything with employers around, you know, finding out a bit more around some of those issues around work commitments as a general theme.
We haven't done, we do more with specials than we do with volunteers, excuse me, and that's in part because of the amount of time sometimes volunteers are spending with us. So again, it's one that would be very difficult to get that qualitative sort of information on it. And I think the solution to the problem you're identifying is probably more down to where we're seeking to put people in the first place. Would probably cut that down, but quite a bit of that turnover, if I can put it that way, goes back to the Explorers programme and the Student Guardians, who we know we will automatically be losing them, so they do fulfil quite a proportion of that as well.
I was just thinking around whether there's any a sort of campaign we might be able to do with employers around, you know, if they've got staff that are specials or volunteers, that as a responsible and good employer, that's a good thing for them to allow some of their staff to do. I accept that not all businesses are going to be in that situation, but some of the medium-sized to bigger organisations hopefully will be.
We've certainly done that in the past. I think you know, one of the key issues from my perspective is having willing volunteers to help support us is fantastic, and you know, even recently when I was doing the Chiefs briefings, I met 2 or 3 of our wonderful volunteers and thank them very much personally for what they do. But we've also got HR considerations, the unions to think about, and so we just need to make sure that we have a really appropriate balance of the duties that we ask people to come and support us with, whilst also having to be mindful of managing our own workforce at the same time. There are a number of things that we could do with larger employers, but again, we just need to be quite clear before we embark on anything what it is that we're asking people to come in and do for us.
Yeah, no, I think, having a plan, a more targeted plan would be good.